There was a time when Jet Li seemed untouchable. On screen, he was lightning in motion, every kick, every strike, every silent stare carrying the weight of centuries of martial tradition. From Shaolin Temple to Hero and Fearless, he wasn't just an actor. He was the embodiment of discipline, speed, and power. To millions of fans around the globe, Jet Li wasn't merely a kung fu star, he was a legend, a symbol of strength that appeared eternal. But in recent years, shocking images of Jet Li emerged. The once unbreakable warrior looked frail, his hair graying, his body bent, his steps uncertain. Fans could barely recognize the hero who once took down armies on screen. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was he dying? Was it just age catching up with him? Or was there a darker truth hidden behind his sudden disappearance from action cinema? The reality, as it turned out, was even more heartbreaking. Behind the camera, Jet Li was fighting a battle not with villains, but with his own body. A chronic illness doctors diagnosed in 2010, combined with years of brutal injuries from decades of martial arts and stunt work, forced him to step away. And the world would finally learn that even its greatest warriors cannot outrun time and pain. But the truth behind it is much darker. Jet Li was not born into the world of luxury or privilege. He entered life on the 26th of April, 1963, in Beijing, China, the youngest of 5 children in a family that struggled to make ends meet. His father died when Jet was only 2 years old, leaving his mother to raise the family alone in a period when China itself was going through deep social and economic turmoil. Poverty wasn't a concept for young Jet Li, it was a daily reality. What set him apart, however, was a small frame hiding an extraordinary gift. By the time he was 8 years old, teachers recognized his natural talent for movement and discipline. He was enrolled in the Beijing Wushu Academy, one of the country's most prestigious martial arts schools, where training was as intense as it was unforgiving. For hours each day, children were pushed beyond exhaustion, stretching, striking, perfecting forms until their muscles shook and their bones ached. It was here that Jet Li's destiny began to take shape. He was a prodigy. At just 11 years old, he won his first national championship in Wushu, astonishing judges and audiences alike with his precision, speed, and the serenity of his movements. Unlike many competitors, Li seemed to merge body and spirit in his performance, creating not only an athletic display but an almost spiritual experience. Over the next 5 years, he collected multiple national titles, quickly becoming China's most celebrated martial arts star. But childhood glory came with sacrifice. Behind the medals and the applause lay a boy who rarely saw his family, who bore the weight of national pride at an age when most children were still discovering who they were. He once admitted in interviews that he never really had a normal childhood. His playground was a training hall, his toys were swords and spears, and his playmates were fellow fighters locked in endless drills. Despite this, the world outside noticed. In the late 1972, Jet Li was chosen to perform martial arts demonstrations abroad, even appearing before US President Richard Nixon at the White House. Nixon, stunned by the boy's talent, remarked that he should become his personal bodyguard when he grew up. Jet Li, with characteristic humility, replied, "I don't want to protect a person. I want to protect 1 billion people." It was an answer that hinted at both his discipline and his deeper sense of purpose. That sense of purpose, born in hardship and forged through Wushu, would carry Jet Li from poverty in Beijing to the bright lights of international cinema. But along the way, the very body that won him fame was quietly accumulating damage that no audience could see. By the early 1982, Jet Li was no longer just a martial arts prodigy, he was on the cusp of becoming a cultural icon. China's film industry was hungry for fresh talent, and Li's reputation as the nation's top Wushu champion made him the perfect candidate for the screen. In 1982, at the age of 19, he starred in Shaolin Temple, a low-budget production that unexpectedly ignited a cultural phenomenon. The film was a runaway success, attracting massive audiences in China and across Asia. For the first time, the world saw not just Kung Fu as choreography, but Wushu as art, and Jet Li as its purest messenger. Overnight, he became a star. Sequels quickly followed, and with each film, his reputation as a martial arts actor deepened. Unlike Bruce Lee, whose style was raw power, or Jackie Chan, who blended comedy with acrobatics, Jet Li's performances carried a kind of grace, a deadly elegance that made his fights look like poetry in motion. He embodied not just strength, but control, balance, and serenity. Audiences believed him not just as a fighter, but as a warrior philosopher. The 1,992nd saw Jet Li expand his reach even further. He took on roles in Hong Kong action cinema that cemented his place in film history. Once Upon a Time in China cast him as the legendary folk hero Wang Fei Hung, a role that demanded not just physical mastery, but the ability to embody national pride and dignity. For many, Jet Li became the screen's ultimate martial hero, carrying the weight of Chinese tradition into the modern era. These films weren't just action-packed, they were cultural statements, and Li was their beating heart. But the pull of Hollywood was inevitable. In 1998, Li made his American debut in Lethal Weapon 4, playing the silent but deadly villain Hua Sing-ku. Though he spoke no English lines, his presence dominated the screen. Audiences in the West who had never seen a true wushu performance were awestruck by his speed and precision. Overnight, Jet Li went from being Asia's superstar to a global action sensation. Hollywood quickly embraced him. He headlined films such as Romeo Must Die, 2000, Kiss of the Dragon, 2001, and Cradle to the Grave, 2003, often paired with hip-hop soundtracks and flashy editing to appeal to Western audiences. While some critics felt these films didn't capture the full depth of his talent, they succeeded in making Jet Li a household name in America. His crowning artistic achievement came in 2002 with Zhang Yimou's Hero, a visually stunning epic that showcased Li not just as a fighter but as an actor capable of profound emotion and gravitas. The film was nominated for an Academy Award and solidified Li's place among the greats of world cinema. In 2006, he delivered another critically acclaimed performance in Fearless, a semi-biographical account of martial artist Huo Yuanjia, which many considered a culmination of his martial arts career. To the outside world, Jet Li was untouchable. He had conquered East and West, become a global icon, and built a legacy rivaling Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. His movements on screen seemed effortless, his body an instrument of perfection honed over decades. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. Years of punishing stunts, relentless training, and the physical toll of embodying martial perfection were beginning to catch up with him. Injuries lingered long after filming, and whispers of health concerns began to circulate. Yet, as always, Jet Li kept silent, hiding the pain behind the mask of the immortal warrior. The very body that had made him a legend was slowly betraying him. And soon, the truth would come crashing into the public eye. For decades, Jet Li's body had been his greatest weapon, but also his greatest burden. Every leap, every kick, every bone-rattling stunt came with a price. Unlike many Hollywood actors who relied on stunt doubles, Jet Li insisted on authenticity. He pushed himself to the edge, sometimes beyond ignoring the long-term consequences. By the late 2002, those consequences became impossible to hide. Years of injuries accumulated, damaged knees, spinal issues, recurring ankle pain. Behind the scenes, he lived with constant discomfort. On set, he would mask the pain, finishing fight sequences with the same grace the world had come to expect. Off set, he struggled to walk normally. But the greatest blow came in 2010, when doctors diagnosed him with hyperthyroidism, a chronic condition that affects the body's metabolism. The disease caused irregular heart rates, weight fluctuations, and extreme fatigue. For a man whose career depended on speed and endurance, it was devastating. Medications prescribed to stabilize his condition altered his appearance, adding to public concern. His once sharp, youthful look softened. His body, once sculpted by years of training, appeared frail. Rumors quickly spread when photos of Jet Li began circulating online. Fans were shocked by the contrast. The once indestructible kung fu master now looked like a weary old man. Some speculated he was on the brink of death. Others questioned if he was hiding a more sinister illness. The truth, however, was both simpler and more tragic. Jet Li was still alive and fighting, but his battles were no longer against enemies on screen. They were against his own body. In interviews, Li admitted the doctors had warned him to step away from action films. Continuing to perform stunts, they said, could lead to irreversible injury or worse. Yet, for a man who had built his entire life around martial arts and performance, the idea of retiring was unthinkable. Still, the choice was clear: keep fighting and risk his life, or walk away to preserve what remained of his health. For a time, he tried to balance both worlds. He appeared in the Expendables franchise alongside Hollywood's most iconic action stars, but even there, his roles were noticeably smaller, his movements more restrained. By the mid-2010 second, Jet Li all but disappeared from the industry. The public response was complicated. Fans around the world mourned the loss of their hero, while some criticized his appearance without understanding the toll of hyperthyroidism and decades of physical strain. On Reddit, one fan captured the sentiment bluntly: he is unofficially retired because of his health issue. Yet Li faced this period with characteristic humility. Instead of clinging to fame, he turned inward. He admitted in interviews that he no longer sought to prove himself through movies. Instead, he focused on philanthropy, spirituality, and his family. He even revealed that he was at peace with his physical decline, saying, "I'm just a human being. I'm not a hero. I'm not an immortal." But for those who had grown up watching him defy gravity and defeat armies on screen, seeing Jet Li so vulnerable was nothing short of heartbreaking. The world had lost not just a superstar, but the illusion that some legends could last forever. Still, the darkest moment was yet to come when shocking photos of Jet Li circulated worldwide, showing him frail, hunched, and barely recognizable. Fans who once saw him as immortal were forced to confront the painful truth. Their hero was human after all. The moment of reckoning came not in a film, but in a single photograph. In 2018, an image of Jet Li began circulating online, sending shockwaves across the world. The photo, taken during a visit to a Tibetan temple, showed the legendary martial arts star hunched over, his frame frail, his face aged beyond his years. The man who once embodied timeless power looked decades older than his actual age of 55. For fans who had worshipped his youthful speed and immortal presence, the picture felt like a collective heartbreak. Social media erupted. Headlines screamed, "What happened to Jet Li?" Speculation ranged from terminal illness to secret surgeries. In truth, it was neither. It was the visible toll of hyperthyroidism and decades of punishing stunt work catching up to him. The myth of the indestructible warrior shattered overnight. For Jet Li himself, that moment was both painful and liberating. He acknowledged the photo in interviews, calmly explaining his condition and reassuring fans he wasn't dying. Yet he also admitted the reality. His body was no longer capable of withstanding the rigors of action cinema. The doctors had been right all along. The unstoppable fighter had reached his limit. It was a tragic climax to a life lived in physical extremes. From his earliest childhood in the Beijing Wushu Academy to his meteoric rise through Chinese and Hollywood cinema, Jet Li had demanded everything from his body, and his body had finally said no. To those who had watched him dominate the screen, the sight of their hero brought a cruel but undeniable truth. Even the strongest warriors cannot defeat time. What made the tragedy deeper was the symbolism. Jet Li had represented more than just martial arts. He was the spiritual successor to Bruce Lee, the disciplined counterpart to Jackie Chan. For audiences across the world, he had been a bridge between East and West, tradition and modernity, myth and reality. And yet, the man behind the legend was as fragile as any other. The photo sparked waves of sorrow but also respect. Many fans recognized that Jet Li had given the world everything: his skill, his body, his youth. He had paid the price for decades of breathtaking performances. While some still yearned for a comeback, others accepted the truth. The age of Jet Li as an action hero had ended. But tragedy, in his case, did not mean defeat. In later interviews, Li revealed that facing illness and physical decline had forced him to embrace a new philosophy. He no longer measured his worth by how high he could kick or how fast he could move. Instead, he turned to philanthropy, launching the One Foundation to aid disaster relief and education efforts. He found solace in Buddhism, reflecting deeply on life, impermanence, and the meaning of true strength. Yet, the image of Jet Li frail, aged, and unrecognizable remains etched in the minds of millions. It was the stark, tragic climax to a life lived at impossible speed. The legend had slowed, the immortal had aged, and the invincible had finally revealed his humanity. Today, Jet Li may no longer leap across rooftops or dismantle villains with a blur of fists, but his legacy is untouchable. His films remain monuments to a golden era of martial arts, cinema works that inspired not only moviegoers, but also a generation of martial artists, filmmakers, and dreamers around the world. Shaolin Temple, Once Upon a Time in China, Hero, Fearless. These titles continue to echo his artistry and discipline. What makes his story so powerful is not just the triumphs, but the humanity revealed in his downfall. By stepping away, Jet Li reminded the world that even heroes are mortal. His struggle with hyperthyroidism and lifelong injuries became more than just a personal tragedy. It became a lesson about balance, humility, and acceptance. The warrior who once vowed to protect 1 billion people now embodies a different kind of strength. The courage to acknowledge weakness and the wisdom to embrace life beyond the spotlight. For fans, the image of a frail Jet Li was painful, but it also stripped away the illusion of invincibility, leaving something more profound: truth. The truth that legends are human, that strength has limits, and that real heroism sometimes means knowing when to stop. And so, Jet Li's legacy lives on not only in the breathtaking battles he immortalized on screen, but in the quiet reminder he leaves behind. Even the mightiest warrior must one day lay down his sword.